And, Mr. Speaker, I support this resolution because the gentleman from Indiana knows better. It doesn't require words to question patriotism. We have had plenty of implication throughout this debate on this floor on the other side of the aisle, and death by 1,000 cuts is the same as direct words. And it is irresponsible and unconscionable that the other side of the aisle has questioned the patriotism of the members who disagree. It is Congress's job to disagree.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I'd like an opportunity to finish. It is Congress's job to disagree. It is our role in the system of checks and balances as our founding fathers envisioned them. Unfortunately, a role that was absent for the last 12 years. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The Chair thanks the gentlelady.
Mr. Speaker,
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
I'd like to, on my time, yield to the gentlelady. I'd like to yield to the gentlelady on my time, since she wouldn't yield on her time. Will the gentlelady please identify by name a Republican who's called a Democrat in this debate unpatriotic?
Mr. Booyer,
yes.
Thank you for yielding. And I was just taking my opportunity because you have had more than 45 minutes to an hour of your own time to discuss your own views, and each of us would like that same opportunity. It is 12:40 in the morning. So I appreciate you yielding, and I can tell you, as I just mentioned in my remarks, that it does not require express words. By implication, there are many members on your side of the aisle who have questioned the patriotism of any of us who disagree with the President's policy. The President's policy is inappropriate, and it is Congress's role to question, to engage in vigorous oversight. That is a role that was absent for the last 12 years, and that is why the American people elected the Democrats to lead this chamber on November 7th and move this country in a new direction, which unfortunately you have neglected to do.
That I have neglected to do?
You collectively.
Are you saying that are you questioning my motive?
No, Mr. Boyer.
Members will suspend. Chair reminds the members to address the chair.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry. Is it proper for one member to try to question the motive of another member?
Would the gentleman yield? Would the gentleman yield?
Mr. Speaker?
Members will suspend while the chair addresses the parliamentary inquiry. Even in heated debate, the members should be more orderly in the process of claiming and yielding time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
Thank you.
Will the gentleman yield so that I can explain myself?
I'm thankful that the late gentlelady gave the answer to her question, and the answer was that it was implicit. It's very easy in debate to come down and to create a straw person and then attack the straw person. If the gentlelady has felt that way, that is completely unfortunate. But please don't say you have been called unpatriotic. That's the exchange I had with an earlier speaker. Don't accuse Republicans of such things. I am disturbed by that and very bothered. More than pleased.
Does the gentleman not understand that when words are used, that they don't have to actually be exact words to suggest a particular opinion on the part of a member? And do you really think that it is beyond question that any of the members on your side of the aisle, as they engaged in this discussion and debate, did not question the patriotism of our members? I mean, methinks thee doth to protest too much, as the gentleman stated earlier. And I yield to the gentleman.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
I thank the gentlelady for her remarks. More than pleased.
I appreciate it.
Chair recognizes the gentleman.
And I thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was watching the debate prior to my speech, I wrote down a quote that was stated by the gentleman from Indiana, looking at the Democrats, saying, "How can we say we support the troops?" Question mark. Now, if that's not questioning the patriotism of our side, I don't know what is. You kept saying,
I seek to reclaim my time, because that is a legitimate question. As a commander in the field, if you say to the commander, "I support you," all right, what's the commander going to say? The commander says, "All right, I have a mission," and you say, "I support you." That means, I suppose, that I support you by making sure that you've been properly trained, that you have your uniforms, that you have your ammunition, you have your helmet, you have your body Kevlar, you have what's necessary to accomplish your mission. But do you? If the commander says, I need more troops to accomplish that mission, you say, but you can't have those. Is that then supporting the commander? That's why I pointed out the contradiction in that the Senate says to General Petraeus, we agree, you are our best commander to go over there. And before they took that vote, he said, I need those 5 brigades. So they pass the vote and they send General Petraeus over. Now we're faced with a vote that says, I support the troops. I support the members of the armed forces. How can we say, I support you, but Mr. Commander, we're not going to give you the troops? That's the point of the question. So please don't try to spin it into something that says, oh, you're calling me unpatriotic. That's what I think is rather, peculiar. Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Ryan.
And I thank you, and I thank my friend from Connecticut who I'm making.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio for 3 minutes.
I just want to, Mr. Speaker, it is entirely possible and welcomed under the Constitution of the United States to have disagreements about how we need to handle troop deployments, how we need to handle our situation in different wars. And it's not to be said that because one party or one group of people have a different philosophy and a different strategy that somehow they're not supporting the troops. Now that your party and your president, the Republican Party, Mr. Speaker, and the Republican president are the ones who sent our kids to battle without armor, without body armor. And it took Jack Murtha months to uncover it and then to finally get it paid for and distributed. It was the Republican Party, Mr. Speaker, who sent kids into battle without up-armored Humvees. Now, nobody questioned the Republican Party's patriotism, and nobody asked them if they supported the troops. Again, we called you incompetent, we said you were incapable, we said you were derelict of your duty, we said you should have provided oversight and you didn't, but we never called you unpatriotic. Now, enough of the unpatriotic business. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now want to recognize Mr. Chris Murphy of Connecticut. He will be our last speaker, and as we all know, he is a veteran of Iraq.
The chair.
Or.
For how much time does the gentlelady from California yield to the gentleman from Connecticut?
I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Connecticut.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentlelady for yielding. I often get confused with my good friend from Pennsylvania. Let's just touch for 1 minute before I address the resolution on the question that our friends from the other aisle brought to us today, and then Mr. Ryan was so good enough to talk about as well. That is this notion that in order to support the troops, you have to support the commander of the troops. Well, having spent the last 2 years walking around talking to every sector of the constituents of the 5th District in Connecticut, having a sense of where the American people came down in November on this question, the American people seem to agree with folks on this side of the aisle, which says this: there is a difference between supporting the troops and supporting the commander. It's not an issue of patriotism necessarily. It's an issue of differentiating between the brave men and women who are over there fighting and dying for this country and the man who sends them into battle. You can disagree with him and you can support the troops. You can do that out in the public as a matter of your private advocacy, and you can do that here on this floor. That's where the American public came down on Election Day. They said loud and clear that day, we support the troops. They go every day to celebrations of those troops when they leave and when they come home. They go to much more somber ceremonies when they don't return home. And then on Election Day, they come out and they say this: I support those troops. I don't support the man who put them into harm's way in the manner that he did that. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Speaker Pelosi and Leader Hoare for allowing us the opportunity to be here this morning. It's late at night, and I'll be brief in my remarks on the resolution before us. Amidst the embarrassing overabundance of thorny foreign policy questions before this House currently, the question before this chamber tonight is a fairly simple one. Do we agree with the nation's military establishment, with the country's foreign policy community, with popular opinion, and reject this president's very wrong-headed plan to send 21,000 more troops into Iraq? Or do we remain silent in homage to Congress's past and allow this potentially disastrous escalation to move forward? I think the question answers itself, and I'm proud today to stand here in support of this resolution and register my strong support for our troops and my strong opposition to escalating this war. As we finish the debate tonight, I've been joined in these final remarks by some of the younger colleagues in the House of Representatives, and I think our unity is significant. It should remind other members of this House that we're discussing the fates of many young men and women, my classmates, my friends, that are this hour fighting and dying in a country halfway around the world. As younger members, we also serve as reminders that our duty here is not just to set policies to secure the safety of our country in terms of months or years, but also in terms of decades. Mr. Speaker, I've never fought in a war. I haven't shot another man on the battlefield, nor have I been wounded myself. But I've been allowed the privilege to represent my constituents in this body because of the selfless bravery of those men and women around this country that made a different choice than I did, those that volunteered to go overseas and fight and defend this country. And it's my duty to stand here today and thank them for their service, thank their families for their service, but also to be their advocate here tonight. Because the President is asking a cadre of our bravest young men and women to go house to house in Baghdad to root out an insurgency while he does virtually nothing to address the systematic causes of that insurgency. 100,000 troops may not be able to do the job that the President is asking 21,000 to do. Escalating the number of troops in Baghdad hasn't worked in the past, and it most likely won't work here. Through his actions, the President is putting our soldiers' lives at unnecessary and unconscionable risk. There is a resolution in Iraq, but it's a political solution. It's not a military resolution. And we owe it to our soldiers, who have done everything that we have asked them to do, to stand up to a president who would ask them to do a job that they cannot and should not do. And beyond our duty to our current generation of troops on the ground, our responsibility, quite frankly, also lies with the generations to come. I decided to seek a seat in this House at a relatively young age because I was fearful that the decisions that were being made here today will have dramatic consequences for the world that my future children and grandchildren will grow up in. And I came here to begin a conversation that acknowledges that what will make this nation safe for generations is not a nation built on bullying, not a strategy based on scattershot military intervention, but a comprehensive foreign policy that combines American might with American diplomacy. In order to secure this nation for the next generation, we need to acknowledge that the most important questions we must ask is not who do we attack next. I'd ask for an additional minute.
Yield the gentleman an additional minute and a half.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut for an additional 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question is not who do we attack next, but instead how do we reset our place in this world in a way that prevents the forces who would do America harm from becoming stronger. Mr. Speaker, we need to come to grips with the fact that we live in a world in which our own supposed allies create societies that foster extremism and violence amongst their most marginalized members. And at the same time, our nation often strangely views cultural and political global detachment as a virtue rather than a weakness. And this combination causes those that speak different tongues and those that worship different gods to look upon our great nation with undeserved derision. This must change. And from my mind, we do that in 3 parts. First, we must pass this resolution in order to pivot to a much broader conversation. And in that conversation, in the coming days and months, we must redeploy our troops both to home and to fights that are central to the war on terror, such as in Afghanistan. The gentlemen from the other side of the aisle are right. This battle with terrorists who may do harm to this country does not end, no matter what happens on the ground in Iraq. But we must focus on our energies there. And lastly, we need to begin, going forth from today, to renew that multilateral spirit that once made this country great by proving ourselves in the future to be both a strong America and a humble America. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today in support of this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.